And now, filling in for Rush Limbaugh, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Stein.
Yes, America's anchorman is away, and this is your undocumented anchorman, Mark Stein. No supporting paperwork whatsoever, just another foreign exchange student here at the Limbaugh Institute for Advanced Conservative Studies. It's a great program. Guys like me get to come here, and Hunter Biden gets a couple of extra Ukrainian directorships. It's what do they call it? A quid pro Joe. Anyway, it all works out, and it's great to be here. And don't worry, because Rush will return for Veterans Day on Monday, and it's a thrilling moment to be here. It's a thrilling moment in the history of this republic, because today is the day that a colossus of the era has decided to jump into the Democratic presidential nominating race. And by jump in, I mean, I think he's filed his nomination papers with the Secretary of State in Alabama. Is that correct? Is that the one? He's going to file his papers there, registering, I don't know whether he's registering an actual presidential campaign or just an exploratory committee for a presidential campaign, or maybe just an exploratory committee for an exploratory committee for a presidential campaign. But Michael Bloomberg, the great nanny of New York, the great former mayor of New York, has decided to jump in on the Democrat side. He's been a Republican mayor. He's been an independent, he's been a lifelong Democrat, and he's now decided there's an opening in the presidential race because the identity politics millennials are just pining for another septuagenarian white guy who wants to confiscate their guns. So Bloomberg has decided to jump in the race. He's a moderate, because that means he just wants to ban supersized sodas as opposed to all of them. Bloomberg is jumping into the race today, and it's bad news for old Quid Pro Joe Biden, because Quid Pro Joe, he's supposed to be in the moderate lane, and his moderation is a bit flabby. His moderation is out of shape. So they've decided they need someone else in the moderate lane, and that is going to be Bloomberg, which basically means I would think that they're almost certain to end up with a left-wing candidate. Now, the thing about it is, the central fact about Joe Biden is he can't raise any money, which you need, unless you're Trump, because Trump spent, $37.79 getting elected president. For anyone but Trump, you need to spend a gazillion dollars, so you have to raise a gazillion dollars, and he can't raise anything, Joe Biden. And what he raises, he just blows through. And the one thing that Joe Biden has is no money. The one thing Bloomberg has is money. So right now, he's just made Joe Biden's life incredibly difficult, because to hang on to his command of the squishy, soft, boggy, woozy, semi-geriatric, tottering about on the stage, not quite sure what state he's in, moderate lane, his command of that boggy, moderate ground has just got a whole load more expensive. I find Michael Bloomberg an interesting figure. He was Me Too before Me Too was cool. He had all these, not quite a Harvey Weinstein level of sexual harassment suits, but he had, as President Trump alluded to, I think just an hour ago at one of his helicopter press conferences, he certainly settled more than one of those suits a few years back. He had quite an old boys kind of culture at Bloomberg. He used to pass women in the corridor and he'd say, "I do her." And then he would explain that a few years later, when he was asked why he would be saying of all these women, "Oh, I do her," that he thought it was a phrase meaning you'd be prepared to go out and perhaps take them to dinner and a movie, perhaps go and have a chocolate malt at the soda fountain with them. That's what the phrase I do her means. But this is rather belied by the fact that among the many interesting features he had on open display in the Bloomberg offices were blow-up sex dolls and giant rubber breasts with squirting nipples. So if he does get elected president, these are going to make very attractive additions to the Rose Garden. I don't know, whenever you see anything going on in the Rose Garden, it looks so dull. I would love it if, like, President Bloomberg would be standing there in front of a couple of giant rubber breasts with squirting nipples. Perhaps on 4th of July they could all squirt red, white and blue. Anyway, we're all excited. Bloomberg is in the race. Meanwhile, impeachment goes on. I should tell you, by the way, the difference. This is America's #1 radio show. We're coming from far northern New England. We have Mike and Greg in New York, and we have Mr. Snerdley monitoring the show to make things don't get out of hand from an undisclosed location. But, you know, when you listen to most of these conservative talk show hosts, they always say they're doing the show from a bunker. And, you know, I thought I'd take it to the next level. So I'm doing the show from a skiff. Do you like these skiffs? They're fantastic. They're named after Adam Skiff, who spends his whole life in one. But they're way cool. I went out, I've had one installed. I bought a copy of Martha Stewart's Skiff Living. It's great. She's got all the tips there for how to decorate your skiff. And it's fantastic. So don't bother with shows from bunkers. Any guy can have a show from a bunker. We're doing a show. Let's do as Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney said, let's do the show right here in the skiff. So we're doing the show here from the skiff today. And because it's the end of the week, you know what that means.
Live from Ice Station EIB, it's Open Line Friday.
Yes, it is. 1-800-282-2882 is the number to call to get on the show. And that's all you got to do. You just got to dial the telephones, stick your finger in, and it only works with rotary phones. That's why I say dial. It won't work if you try pushing or try touch tone screen display or anything like that. You've got to have a rotary phone. But get your rotary phone out, 1-800-282-2882. From Monday to Thursday, this show is under the ruthless control of a highly trained broadcast specialist. But he's not here today. And as usual, he has left us a conundrum because of this whole Open Line Friday on Thursday thing. So whether we should do semi-non-open line Thursday on Friday or whatever, and I never know quite how to make the call on this, but we will have a more expansive range of topics than we would normally entertain when Rush is exercising his highly trained broadcast specialist's ruthless control of the content of the program. So you want to throw something at me from completely out of the blue, go ahead and do it. And I always love to hear from liberals. If you think you can justify this impeachment thing, go on. Have a go. Give it your best shot. 1-800-282-2882. Tell you what I'd also like to hear from. We hear all this thing about the mainstream media, the responsible media. They're not state media like Fox. They're not propaganda like Rush. I'm astonished at now how all three networks, there's supposed to be three old school networks, ABC, CBS, NBC. As we know from Ronan Farrow's book, NBC covered up for Harvey Weinstein and for Matt Lauer. They knew about it. They covered up for those guys because they're all, oh, yes, me. Oh, Trump. Oh, have you heard that disgusting tape of his? Oh, it's so shocking. Harvey Weinstein, we're not running that story. Matt Lauer, Matt's a great guy. Sure, occasionally he'll take some producer off to cover the Olympics and sexually assault her. What's the big deal about that? Then we've got what's going on at ABC. ABC, they knew about the Epstein thing, right? And they wouldn't break that. They refused to cover that story. They had the goods. They had the goods on Epstein and on Bill Clinton in 2016. And they refused to run that story. And they said it was because the stuff about Prince Andrew, They were concerned that Buckingham Palace wouldn't give them an interview with William and Kate. Are you Americans? What kind of... ABC stands for the American Broadcasting Company, right? And they're not going to run a story on some mass pedo nymphet procurer, a sex slaver, a sex trafficker, because they might not get an interview with the second in line to the throne. Did 1776 happen at all down at ABC? Then we have CBS, whose record on this, they haven't exactly covered up for Harvey Weinstein or Jeffrey Epstein, but they did fire the person who leaked the audio revealing that ABC had covered up for Harvey Weinstein. So we now have all three mainstream networks who consider it the priority to protect. Yeah, and by the way, the person at CBS that they fired was what they call a whistleblower. That's right. She or he blew the whistle on what was going on at ABC, covering up for sexual predators. But that whistleblower gets no protection. That whistleblower's out the door. That whistleblower loses the job. That whistleblower's gone. It's this faux whistleblower. This whistleblower who hasn't blown any whistle ever, who gets all the protection. But ABC, CBS, NBC, it's fascinating to me. In the end, it's all Me Too, all feminism, all we believe women, but not when it comes to protecting the powerful men in our own industry. They're all frauds, these guys. They're basically basically ABC, CBS, and NBC are PR outlets for the powerful elites, for powerful mainstream elites, and they protect them. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about impeachment. It's Adam Schiff is out of the skiff. That's one of my favorite limericks. If you know how it ends, give me a call. Adam Schiff is out of the skiff, and he's going to be holding open hearings, supposedly, next week, which are actually more like, for any old Soviets listening, more like the old school Moscow show trials. We'll talk about that. Talk about the shake-up in the presidential race with the latest hotshot Democrat, latest Democrat savior to save the world from Trump. That's Mike Bloomberg. And anything else that is... Oh, I'll tell you one other thing I don't want to forget. The 30th anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down. That's this weekend. President Reagan said, tear down this wall in 1987. All the liberals, all the Democrats, half the Republicans thought he was a nut, a simpleton. Why would you say tear down the wall? The wall's here to stay. 2 years later, they tore it down. That's 30 years ago this weekend. We'll talk about that and all the other stuff that's on your mind. Open Line Friday with Mark Stein on America's #1 radio show.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
Hey, Mark Stein in for Rush behind the golden EIB microphone. One thing I want to say before I go any further. Eric Chiaramella, he's the whistleblower. He's the whistleblower. And it's like, in fact, I believe that's Italian for whistleblower. It's an old Neapolitan song about an old Neapolitan whistleblower blowing his whistles down by the old port in hopes of attracting the attentions of a lovely young soprano played by Adam Schiff. It's a lovely old Neapolitan folk song from the late 19th century. Chiaramella. And the reason I want to say it is because Rush said it yesterday, and it's now in the papers. He was the world's best-known secret whistleblower. Like this name, I haven't had anything like this. It's like everyone's known this name for whatever it is now, 6 weeks, and nobody's been able to say it. There was a kind of agreement. And then Adam Schiff, the guy who's been holding this impeachment dinner theater in the Skiff every night, even though the Skiff is supposed to be for things that are of national security. It's the cone of silence from the old Get Smart show, where it's top secret. You go into the cone of silence and all the rest of it. So Adam Schiff has been holding the first ever impeachment in the cone of silence, and then he accidentally releases a and says, oh, no, the whistleblower is in fear of his life. He's a top secret CIA agent. He's a guy who's spent his life rappelling down the walls of the presidential palace to topple regimes here and there. But now suddenly he's petrified for his life in case some bloggers are mean to him or there's a mean-spirited tweet out there. So we can't possibly tell you the name of this whistleblower. That's why we have to do everything in the Skiff, because it's a big national security thing. Trump will get the whistleblower killed if the whistleblower's name leaks out. Then he puts it in a transcript he releases to the media. Chiaramella, baby. And Eric, what is it called? Eric Chiaramella. Eric Chiaramella is the thing that's on a bright Hawaiian Christmas day. I love that song. Eric Chiaramella. Lovely record, that. Eric Chiaramella. I just want to keep saying it because we've all known it, but for some reason everyone agreed we couldn't say the name until Adam Schiff, deep in the Skiff, leaked it out of the Skiff. And now we can all say it. And I haven't felt like this since... it must be about 15 years ago now, Ricky Martin. Do you remember the first time somebody said, oh, Ricky Martin, they say he's gay. And I'd go, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. He projects vigorous heterosexuality. Have you heard La Vida Loca? You're telling me a gay guy could sing that? And so there were all these things. Ricky Martin, I saw him at the gay bar the other night. And by the time Ricky Martin actually said, I've got breaking news, I'm gay. Eric Chiaramella is the Ricky Martin of impeachment news. Everybody knew it, but nobody could say it. I'm just glad. I'm relieved to be able to say it. Do you know what's also interesting? He's in the Mueller report. If you go and Google the Mueller report and you get out the big old PDF or whatever it is, and you click on the find and you enter in Chiaramella, you'll find he's in a footnote there, and he is believed to be the person who leaked certain things, certain fascinating documents. This, by the way, don't get confused. This isn't Ukraine now. This is Russia. He was leaking stuff 2 years ago he's alleged to be the source that was leaking stuff 2 years ago. So we've had a whistleblower who's been blowing that whistle. That whistle is exhausted. His lips must be so chapped. He's been whistling for 2 years, to the point where this guy is actually mentioned by name in the Mueller report. That's what a tight little circle this thing is. It's like the way Christopher Steele connected with everybody. Chiaramella also connects with everybody. He connects with Biden. He connects with Schiff in the Skiff. He connects with the Mueller report. He connects with the New York Times. Whistleblowers are supposed to be people who are isolated, who live in fear of anyone finding out what it is they've got the goods on. This guy is the best connected guy, connected to Mueller, connected to Schiff in the Skiff, connected to Biden, connected to them all, to the point where the so-called whistleblower, whose identity can't be revealed, is actually mentioned by name in the great mouldering nothing that is the Mueller report. This is Mark Stein in for Rush on Open Line Friday. We got lots more still to come. Yes, America's Anchorman is away. He'll be back Veterans Day. But if you do not want to be discombobulated by a sinister foreign guest host, we have the solution for you. You can go to rushlimbaugh.com and become a Rush 24/7 subscriber. And Rush 24/7 means exactly what it says. You can get Rush 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. He's never away. You can get him in any known delivery system. And if they invent some new ones, you'll be able to get him in that format too. But you can get the radio show not just live as it happens, but any time of the day or night that suits you. It suits your convenience. If you've got a bit of a problem in the middle of the night and you have to get up, you can listen to the whole 3 hours of the show at 2 a.m. if that's what tickles your fancy. At the same time, you can get him in text. We got all the transcripts of the show. You can get him in video on the DittoCam. You can get the vast archive. 3 decades of penetrating insights into the state of the world. They're all available there. All you got to do is go to rushlimbaugh.com, become a Rush 24/7 subscriber, or pick the old combo membership. This is the deal of the millennium. When you get Rush 24/7 with a subscription to the Limbaugh letter, which is great all by itself, you'll also get the EIB Network Collectible Challenge coin. It's more valuable than U.S. currency. It's more valuable than all these gold coins, all these weird things I see when I'm watching Fox News where they're telling you to buy silver coins, and you notice that for some reason the silver coin that they display is from the Royal Canadian Mint with the Queen on the back. You don't want that. Instead, get the EIB Network Collectible Challenge coin. When the Iranians launched the EMP attack and the banking system is wiped out and we're back to a barter system, and where all you got to barricade yourself in your home because your feral neighbors are trying to break in and kill you and steal your women folk and take your supplies of canned food. The EIB Network Collectible Challenge coin will be what gets you through those tough times. So go to rushlimbaugh.com, become a combo member, and get Rush 24/7 with the Limbaugh letter. I got to tell you this before we go any further, because I thought this was the most hilarious headline, a tragic headline, and it explains why American newspapering is dying. This is from the Washington Post. The headline: Can Republicans relearn how to accept political outcomes they don't like? This is with reference, believe it or not, to Trump. And it talks about liberals musing that even if Trump were to lose next year, he might simply refuse to vacate the White House. He might claim, as he did after the 2016 election, that millions of people voted illegally against him. He might allege that a foreign country hacked the voting machines. He'll say, how unknowing. You have to be. There are rocks. There are tiny pebbles at the bottom of Lake Superior that are more self-aware than Washington Post headline writers. Can Republicans relearn how to accept political outcomes they don't like? The salient fact of American life since November 2016, for 3 years now, has been that the losing party has refused to accept the political outcome of the 2016 election. The Democrats were the ones who couldn't, quote, accept political outcomes they don't like, unquote. And they set out immediately to delegitimize that. They started by just some peripheral stuff, like saying they wouldn't be coming to the inauguration. Well, who cares? The inauguration was a waste of time anyway, and Trump shouldn't have held that inauguration. He should have, like Coolidge being sworn in by oil lamp in Plymouth Notch, Vermont. He should have had one of those kind of oaths of office, where he took it down by the southern border as he laid the first brick in the wall. That's what he should have done for the inauguration, the minute the Democrats started saying they weren't going to attend. But from the hours after, as we see, now the Washington Post has put this headline, Can Republicans Relearn How to Accept Political Outcomes They Don't Like? Right after it's been revealed that the Democratic lawyer for the whistleblower, Senor Chiaramella, the whistleblower, the world's most famous undercover whistleblower, has been plotting his so-called coup. He's been using the word coup on his Twitter account for 3 years. Coup actually means an illegal usurpation of power, a coup d'etat. That's what it means. It means you don't accept the legitimate government, and so you're going to topple the legitimate government. And the whistleblower's lawyer uses that word. And that's essentially what they did. Adam Schiff, the king of the skiff, lord of the skiff, for 2 years, he told us that if only we could be admitted into the skiff, we would see that, in fact, Trump had colluded with Russia. He was on MSNBC every night saying that Trump, yes, he'd seen the stuff, he'd seen the evidence, and Trump had colluded with Russia. Oh, really? That's fascinating. Do you think I could have a look at that evidence? Oh, I'm sorry, you don't have clearance for the skiff. But if you could get into the skiff, if you were one of the ones who were allowed into the skiff with me, Adam Schiff, then you would see the incontrovertible proof that Trump has colluded with Russia. So then eventually the guy Mueller, this guy Mueller, does his report, or he puts his name to the report. He's basically at weekend at Mueller's. They're dragging the corpse of Robert Mueller around because it turns out he's been pushing up daisies since like 1987, and they get his hand and they sign his signature to the report, and they issue the Mueller report. And then it turns out the Mueller report's a bust. So then they say, oh, well, okay, we're going to get Mueller to testify in purpose. So then they drag the rotting corpse of Robert Mueller and prop him up in the chair in Congress to testify, and it's a disaster. The guy, it's hard to believe the guy even signed the report, never mind wrote it. And Schiff, Adam Schiff, has lied about this for 2 years. He said there's proof and that he's seen proof. And then after and you can't see the proof because you don't have clearance for the skiff. That's the beauty. That's why, have you ever wondered why the Soviets held secret trials? It's because whenever you ask for any proof, we'd love to show you the proof, old boy. But I'm afraid you simply don't have clearance to get into the skiff with Adam and me. It's a national security issue. So, unfortunately, unless you're in the skiff, we've been in the skiff for 2 years discussing Russia. Now we're going to be in the skiff for another 2 years discussing Ukraine. But believe me, if you could get into the skiff with us, I'm sorry you don't have clearance. I'll try and put in a word, see if we can get you clearance. If you were in the skiff with me, you'd see that Trump colluded with Putin, and Trump tried to bribe Ukraine, and Trump also threatened to nuke Tajikistan. Wait a minute, I never heard that. What's that with Tajikistan? Oh, that's the inquiry we're going to hold the Tajikistan investigation after the Ukraine investigation's gone nowhere. And boy, if you think the Ukraine investigation is scandalous, wait till you see this Tajikistan one we got coming up in a year and a half's time. This is, and just to bring it back to this anonymous whistleblower, Signor Chiaramella, the world's most famous top secret undercover whistleblower. What's interesting is the attempt, the resurgence of the trend of anonymity in American political discourse. We've got a hit book supposedly coming out. I believe it's already a bestseller, even though it doesn't come out for a couple of weeks yet, by a guy called Anonymous, who is supposed to be a senior official in the Trump administration. And you wonder who that is. Is it, who is this? Is this Mike Pompeo? Who is it? Is it Mike Pence? Maybe who's written it. No, at best, it'll be some assistant, deputy, assistant under deputy, under assistant, under deputy secretary of the Department of the Interior or something. And has written an entire book in which he says that it's necessary for him to speak out. Not speak out by putting his name and his sacred honor to this book, but just writing an anonymous thing. Just as the whistleblower was anonymous. You know who else started out anonymous? Christopher Steele. Christopher Steele's name wasn't revealed until a couple of months after all the stuff about the dossier and the urinating hookers in Moscow and all the rest of it had been out there in the media. And it was, oh, this is a respected intelligence source who has impeccable sources in Russia. You can take this to the bank. Then it turned out to be Christopher Steele, an MI6 spook, actually on the payroll of the Clinton campaign, feeding a lot of Russian disinformation into the Hillary campaign, but that too started out anonymously. And there's something interesting about this, is that if these were really copper-bottomed, impeccable sources that Adam Schiff were trying to hang the president with, there wouldn't be all this anonymity. The anonymity itself speaks for itself. Hey, it's Semi-Open Line Friday. We're going to take your calls straight ahead.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
Open Line Friday on America's #1 radio show. I always love to hear from liberals on Open Line Friday, so give it your best shot. 1-800-282-2882. First up is Jack, and Jack's in an undisclosed part of Georgia. He's probably in his personal skiff in Georgia. But Jack, it's great to have you on the Rush Limbaugh Show.
Hey, it's nice to hear from you, Mark. No, I'm not that far away. I'm pretty close to where the president is right now.
Oh, right.
But let's talk about Michael Bloomberg, okay? I think he's the only Democrat that's got any chance to beat our president, and Donald Trump had better be very careful with Michael Bloomberg. I'll tell you why. If you remember in 2015 when Trump first came down the escalator, the media more or less laughed at him and asked, "Why are you running for president? Do you even think you have a chance?" And his comment was, "I wouldn't be running if I didn't think I could win." Now, last night I was watching Trish Regan. Now, before she came to Fox, she worked for Bloomberg. She was on Bloomberg TV.
Right.
And one of the things she said was, Michael Bloomberg would not be doing this if he didn't think he could win. She said, Michael Bloomberg does not like to lose.
No.
Now, what people got to remember is he made all his billions in media. So right away, the mainstream media, they're already, pushing him as being a centralist. This guy's about as far away from being a centralist as you can get. If you look at New York City, he raised spending in New York City 23% during his term. Giuliani only raised it 8%. Dinkins only raised it 4%.
Right.
Some of the other things he did. He banned smoking in bars, restaurants, public parks. He banned trans fat foods in commercial foods. He tried to ban large sodas, the sugar-based sodas.
That's right, big gulps.
He's all nanny state, this guy.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. No, but you make an interesting point, because the only reason anybody knows his name, even on the East Coast, is because he was mayor of New York City. And if you go back to whatever it was, 2002, a week before that election, he was 12 points behind. Nobody thought he could beat this guy, Mark Green, who was the Democrat he ran against. And Bloomberg had made several calculations. Everyone thought he was a terrible candidate. He was asked whether he liked the Mets or the Yankees, and he said, I like the Boston Red Sox, because he sounded like he'd never set foot in the outer boroughs until a week before the campaign. But at the same time, he had done his calculations rather shrewdly, and despite being 12 points behind, he managed to win against the odds. And he's like an unprepossessing character. He's like a charisma-free zone. I saw people saying that he's boring. In fact, you can make the argument that if you're up against Trump, you can't be more interesting than Trump. So the thing to do to distinguish, to put clear blue water between you and the guy you're running against, you're the boring guy. Bloomberg in 2002 was a long shot for the mayor of New York, and he managed to win that one, Jack.
The problem here again is his media empire is a lot more vast than just New York City. All financial companies, banks, brokerage houses throughout the country, not only throughout the country, throughout the world, all use Bloomberg's system.
Absolutely, those little machines.
So when you're talking about, above blue collar, let's say, a lot of people know who Bloomberg is. And I got a feeling with the media on his side, the rest of the country's going to know who he is pretty soon too.
Well, we're gonna explore that as the show goes on, Jack. Because I'll have a bit of. I take your point. He wouldn't be doing this if he. It's like Donald Trump. There were rumors every 4 years. Trump's going to run for president. Trump's going to run for president. He actually waited until the moment was right. Same thing with Bloomberg. Bloomberg's been one of these guys who's been wanting to run for president for years and years and years and years. And if he's decided to get in this time as opposed to last time or the time before, there must be a reason for that. We'll try and unpack some of that in the next couple of hours. Mark Stein in for Rush. Open Line Friday. Lots of your calls straight ahead.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
Don tweets at me that, in fact, Chiara Mella, I suggested this was the old Neapolitan folk song about a lovelorn whistleblower down by the port trying to attract his love's attention in the shape of Adam Schiff. But apparently Chiara Mella is, I'm confused. Apparently I got it wrong. Chiara Mella actually isn't Italian. It's Gujarati. For those of you from India, you'll be familiar with Gujarati, but apparently it means cheerleader in Gujarati, and he has certainly been that. Effectively, Chiara Mella, for the last 3 years, has been part of the cheerleading troupe, the Radio City Rockettes, the kick line for the deep state, protecting its interests and being unable to accept the result of the 2016 election. Chiara Mella. It's cheerleader in Gujarati.
Now, filling in for Rush Limbaugh, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Stein.
Yes, America's Anchorman is away, but don't worry, he will be back for the Veterans Day edition of the Rush Limbaugh Show this Monday. I'm here at Ice Station EIB. As I said, we've had a brand new skiff installed because everyone's talking about skiffs, and I thought, I don't want to do a show from a bunker. I'd like to do a show from a skiff. So we went to Martha Stewart's Skiff Living, and we've got us like the full Adam Schiff skiff, just like Adam Schiff has in Washington. He's out of the skiff. He's said, okay, we've been holding the impeachment of the president. The president may already have been impeached, convicted, removed from office, and executed in absentia in the skiff with Adam Schiff for the weeks he's been holed up. We don't know. But he's going to do us all a great favor, the 330 million people who can't get into the skiff with him, and he's going to hold a few open sessions. So that presumably means the skiff in Washington is available if you want to book it for your daughter's birthday party or something like that. Do give them a call, 1-800-ADAM-SKIFF, and the skiff is free next week if you'd like to book it for your 50th wedding anniversary or your retirement party or whatever. It started out that it was supposed to be for confidential national security things. You had to do all this exciting security theater that the guys love. Leave your cell phones outside the skiff and all the rest of it. Now that basically Adam Schiff has decided to make it the location of the first top secret impeachment in American history, apparently you can use the Skiff for whatever you want. So go ahead, book it for your daughter's birthday party. I also mentioned that today, we'll be talking to Jim DeMint a little later this hour. Jim DeMint has a new book out that you will want to pick up, and is actually discusses some actually the fundamental question about conservatism, really. The book is about what you conserve, and we'll be talking to him about that a little later this hour. On that subject, today, this weekend, is the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. To mark the occasion, there's going to be the unveiling of a new statue of Ronald Reagan in Berlin, opposite the Brandenburg Gate, more or less just overlooking the scene where he gave his famous speech in 1987, where he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And all the clever people, all the striped pants crowd at Foggy Bottom, the State Department, that speech went back and forth between the Oval Office and the State Department. The State Department kept taking out tear down this wall. The Oval Office kept putting it back in. Until they're actually on the plane flying over to Berlin. The State Department chaps are still taking the line out. Ronald Reagan's still putting it back in. And he stands there at the wall and delivers it. And all the clever people think this guy, we always thought this Reagan guy was a complete ignoramus. What an idiot. Tear down this wall. Yeah, right, like that's going to happen. And 2 years later, the wall comes down. 30th anniversary. I don't know what the ceremonies are going to be like. You may remember on the 20th anniversary, Barack Obama, he sent a video greeting to the German people on the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And this is what he said, quote, "Few would have foreseen on that day that a united Germany would be led by a woman from Brandenburg, or that their American ally would be led by a man of African descent. Tear down that wall so they can get a better look at me." It's not really an occasion to talk about yourself, Barack. And in fact, that's really the kind of line that you get somebody else to say about you. And in fact, as I'm sure Ronald Reagan would be the first to say, November the 9th, 1989 isn't about any famous person whose name you know, but it's about millions of nobodies whose names are unknown to the world, who led dreary lives, doing unglamorous jobs, and going home to anonymous communist drab flats. But at a critical moment, all those people decided they were no longer going to live in a prison state, and they demanded the right to bust out of the prison state. And in effect, they called the bluff of their jailers. And they're never, no one's going to put up statues to them. No one's going to give great name public buildings after them. But that's what it was, a group of people who decided they were no longer going to live as the prison state demanded they live. And it's amazing how quickly it all crumbled. Once the East German government of Erich Honecker decided they didn't actually have the will to gun down thousands of their own citizens, the whole thing crumbled in nothing flat. And you remember all those things, those interim regimes that they thought were going to be there for a while, the accommodations with communism, the transitional arrangements, they all transitioned a lot faster than anyone thought. And I'll tell you, just while I'm sharing thoughts on this 30th anniversary, it should have been a great victory, because it was the victory of a great, remember, we used to talk about the free world. Liberals and the left didn't. They seem to think the Berlin Wall was there to stop people from West Berlin busting into East Berlin. They didn't realize that communism only works if you actually put up a Berlin Wall to keep people from getting out. But it was a great victory for freedom over the Soviet prison state. And even at the time, it didn't feel like that. And it wasn't presented as that. It was presented instead as some kind of, amorphous, we are the world kind of moment, peacenik moment. And what's strange since then is that all the worst and most corrupting communist ideas, which once used to just be confined to lunatic professors at Western universities, have now bust out of those universities and spread into general life. One of the great features of communism was that jokes could be prosecuted. Milan Kundera, the great Czech novelist, he wrote a fantastic novel called The Joke, where a student makes and a student who's in with the party and has got great prospects with the party, makes one joke, the wrong joke, and his entire life is changed. And now we have that in the West. We have things where you make the wrong kind of joke, you're deplatformed from Twitter. You lose your gig hosting the Oscars. You say 140 characters on Twitter, and if it's the wrong 140 characters, it can detonate the previous 30 years of your career, like it did with Roseanne. We live in a Milan Kundera world. One line on Twitter, and it's over for you. You don't even have to be famous like Roseanne or Steve Martin or the fellow who was supposed to be hosting the Oscars. You can just be a nobody, like the young lady who was flying from New York for a vacation in South Africa. And just before she took off, she made a joke on Twitter. By the time she landed in South Africa, her career was over. She lost her job. Her life had been completely destroyed. So we now have adopted Soviet levels of enforcement. I'll make one other point as well. One of the things I remember not long after the Berlin Wall, I spent a lot of time in Hungary. I was making some shows there for the BBC, and as usual, the BBC are all just a lot of the BBC camera crew and the director and the producers, all a lot of BBC lefty socialist types, and we'd be meeting with these Hungarian guys. And we'd meet with Josef, and he would be like an urbane, Middle European charmer. And then we'd go on and meet with Georgi, and Georgi would assure us that Josef may seem urbane and charming on the surface, but he'd spent the previous 30 years as an informant for the secret police. And then we'd move on to our appointment with Gabor, who'd tell us that it was, in fact, the eminently civilized and amusing Georgi, who'd been the state informer for the past 3 decades. And then we'd move on to Victor, who'd say, it was actually Gabor who was And the one thing these BBC lefties hated was the idea of snitching. They just thought that was not cricket. It sort of offended their sense of what was proper and right. We now live in a snitch culture, in which if you make the wrong kind of remark you can be making a private remark, and if it happens to be the wrong kind of remark about so-called traditional marriage or whatever, you'll get into a whole heap of trouble. So we've imported, actually wholesale, some of the most unattractive ideas from the eastern side of the Iron Curtain these last 30 years. So the fall of the Berlin Wall, which actually ought to have been the fall of tyranny in the face of the more powerful idea of liberty, in fact, has not come to be like that. And in fact, all the worse, and in some ways, some of those Eastern European countries, like Poland, like Hungary, actually have more sense of themselves as functioning nation states than we do, mired in ridiculous attitudes about being non-judgmental and all the rest of it. So it's actually quite sobering. On the 30th anniversary of what ought to be a great victory for freedom, to actually think about why, with deplatforming and cancel culture and all the worst Soviet communist ideas of thought control are now present not just at American universities, but in our wider life too. We have Senator former senator and now author of a brand new and indispensable book, Jim DeMint. He's going to talk to us in just a moment. Mark Stein in for Rush on America's #1 radio show. We have the author of a great new book with us. You know him as recently senator for South Carolina, Jim DeMint, but in his new guise, he has a brand new book out written with Rachel Bovard called Conservative, Knowing What to Keep, which gets right to the essence of the question, Jim, because a lot of conservatives who listen to this show tend to feel that Republicans haven't been that good at conserving almost anything. And the first part of your book actually is given over to what conservatism is and how it decides what to conserve.
Mark, it's great to be with you. And we are trying to build a national conservative movement, so we need to know what it is. And Rachel and I wrote the book just to help folks realize that conservatism is more than politics or policies or the people that call themselves conservatives. It's about keeping those things that make life better, that make life worth living. And it's bigger ideas that we need to know about because we're in a war with the left right now that's trying to destroy all those things that we care about. And a part of what hopefully the book will help people see is that what's going on in Washington now, the impeachment and the constant fake news, is not just about getting Trump. He's kind of the messenger at this point. It's about the left trying to destroy all of those things that we know make this country great, make it prosperous, and give us a brighter future.
Well, you've got a section in there called Keeping Our Republic, which I guess is as basic as it gets. And yet, just to go back to what we were saying about the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, 30 years after basic as it gets. And yet, just to go back to what we were saying about the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, 30 years after the complete fall of favorably disposed to socialism. That's actually a very worrying sign, isn't it?
It's very disturbing, and we address that in the book about not only the growth and the popular aspect of socialism, but all the facts about how it's failed in history, as you mentioned. And what you mentioned, the chapter on keeping our republic. People forget that America was never intended to be a national democracy. That's why you have the Electoral College. That's why the states could appoint their own U.S. senator, is to keep the states in the forefront of what's going on so that states could do different things and people could live in freedom without some central power telling them what to do. And I just find all over the country, even folks that call themselves conservatives don't really know what we're trying to keep and why we're in this fight in Washington. You talk about it all the time, but we try to get across the idea that what we're trying to keep, it involves a lot of things like the family traditions and marriage, community, church, things that make a country strong.
Yeah, it's interesting. You say right at the beginning of the book that there's a lot of young people who think conservatism just means, hateful, racist, bigoted, white supremacist. But there's a lot of others who just think that it's kind of it means you're sort of old and set in your ways and not terribly interested in anything new. So it's a kind of a hard sell in the modern cultural environment, isn't it?
It is. If you've ever been in the business world, as I spent 25 years, we called it best practices or continuous quality improvement, where you identify those things that work and you make them better continuously. That's what conservatism is understanding those things that work and continuing to build on them in the future. Progressivism is about just throwing out everything and starting over every day as if we had no history. And that's what you see, particularly the Democratic presidential candidates doing now. I mean, whether it's health care or any idea of what we've done before, they want to throw it out and start over again with their Green New Deal and everything else. We just need to know that we're in a battle for not only our own future, but the future of the country and the future of freedom. And as Reagan said, every generation has to fight for freedom to pass it on. And what Rachel and I are trying to do is just help people see what's at stake. And in the end of the book, we talk about, okay, how can we keep these things? How can we win? And that's what we want folks to know.
Well, you mentioned that some of the bigger things like faith and family just now, and those Democrat candidates, Kamala Harris and others of them, walk out on stage and say, "My name is Kamala Harris and my pronouns are whatever," and they announce what their pronouns are. This is something that would have struck even Democrats as nutty as just 5 years ago. And yet, isn't it when something like being a man or a woman is no longer agreed upon, it must surely get difficult then to agree on what a family is.
You're right. One of our chapters is keeping our differences, and we are bringing forward Russell Kirk, a lot of his ideas, and one of his platforms of conservatism was celebrating differences. What we see today on the left is an intolerance for any differences. And we want folks to be free. If they want to be nutty, that's fine, but they shouldn't be using government to force their nuttiness on everybody else. And that's what the left is trying to do, is to force you to use their pronouns when most of us don't really care about it. Most on the left don't care about it either.
Hey, that's a great way to put it, Jim, in praise of private sector nuttiness. That's a good way to look at it. It's a terrific book, Conservative, Knowing What to Keep, and it's actually about getting to the essence of conservatism. And Jim DeMint lays it all out with Rachel Bovard there. Thanks for being with us, Jim. This is Mark Stein in for Rush on the Golden EIB Open Line.
We return to Mark Stein.
Hey, don't worry. Rush will be back on Veterans Day, Monday. He will be fit and refreshed and ready to go on a very solemn day in the American calendar. Rush back Monday. Mark Stein, thrilled to be with you. I was when was it? I think it was February or March this year, and I was doing some dates in Western New York and Pennsylvania, and I was thrilled by the number of Rush listeners who came out to see me at the Kodak Center in Rochester, and big 2,000-seat theaters, and thrilled to look out at actually a sea of Rush fans. And if you're in, I guess maybe not Western New York, but if you're in the eastern part of upstate New York, or if you're in Vermont or New Hampshire, I'll be doing a couple of shows in Montreal. One with the best-selling author Douglas Murray, who has a terrific book actually related to what we were talking about earlier on some of these Twitter storms and things, called The Madness of Crowds, the transgender fevers. If you misgender someone on Twitter, you're banished from public life. I'll be talking to him about that. That'll be on one of the shows. And then our Christmas show, where we don't have any of that heavy stuff, but we do have the great Canadian rock legend Randy Bachman from Bachman Turner Overdrive, and You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, and the Guess Who, American Woman, and all that good time rock and roll, and some other special guests and things. And if you go to marksteinshow.com, you can find out all about that. That's coming up in a couple of weeks. And I always love it because people are always intrigued by well, they're not always, but people with nothing better to do are intrigued by guest hosts because they think, well, this guy, he can't just, work 6 days a year. I wonder what else he does when he's not coming down from the mountains to guest host. So they're always intrigued. Before we, that's it. You can find out about that, marksteinshow.com, but it'll be coming up in Montreal in a couple of weeks. My favorite story of the day, because if you've ever been in an American courtroom, you do like an ingenious argument. This is a guy called Benjamin Schreiber. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, and he was at the Iowa State Penitentiary. He's a convicted murderer. And his argument is that he should have been released because he died 4 years ago. And what happened was he collapsed in his prison cell in 2015, and his heart stopped. and he had a do not resuscitate thing because he didn't like being in prison. So his heart stopped, and he thought the one benefit of being dead was that he wouldn't have to stay in prison. But unfortunately, they did resuscitate him. So he technically died, but he was brought back to life. And he appealed to be released from jail, arguing that by dying, he technically fulfilled his life sentence, which was for the duration of his life. And his life, at any rate his first life, ended when he died. But unfortunately, the Iowa Court of Appeals said that the 66-year-old will have to remain in prison until a medical examiner determines that he is dead for good. Judge Amanda Potterfield wrote, Schreiber is either alive, in which case he must remain in prison, or he is dead, in which case this appeal is moot. And they accused him of trying to have it both ways. And that the fact that Schreiber was able to file a legal motion petitioning for his release on the grounds that he was now dead in itself confirms the petitioner's current status as living. And they decided that the fact that I believe he's now he might try and get this to the U.S. Supreme Court, because his argument was that he was actually dead and he'd asked that he not be resuscitated. And instead they resuscitated him and sent him back to prison. But anyway, this man argues that the fact that he died 4 years ago means that he should now be released from prison now. I will be interested. I would like to see that one before the Supreme Court. Let us go to Alex, who is on what our call screener discreetly bills as the western slopes of Colorado. And no doubt he's in his own skiff up there on the western slopes in Colorado. Alex, great to have you with us on the show. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Mark. Happy to be here speaking with you. I always enjoy your content when Rush isn't around.
Thanks a lot. I'm honored to be here.
I'll start off saying I'm the 24-year-old conservative kid out here, and yep, skiffs everywhere. But
yeah, on the skiff slopes of Colorado. Yeah, no, great place to be. Lovely place to be.
Absolutely. Just seeing that people are getting bogged down with details regarding the impeachment and presidential elections, and I'm seeing that Joe Biden will have to be the front runner, at least for the duration of the impeachment process. And this is being because the whole Democrat selling point to the American people is that Trump's quote-unquote crime is involving foreign governments in our presidential election, which Joe Biden is a part of, you know?
Yeah. That's their argument. And so your argument is that they have to prop Biden up long enough to get this impeachment deal through because the argument that Trump is interfering with a political rival has even less saliency when Biden isn't a political rival. In other words, if he gets knocked out before Iowa because his numbers are so soft and he's broke and he can't raise money, then in a sense he hasn't ever been Trump's political rival because he never even made it to the first caucus. So your argument is they have to keep him going long enough to ram impeachment through.
Right, and it's got to be a pretty hard job for him, but I think that's what he's there for.
Yeah, I actually think I hadn't actually thought of it like that, but the argument, because right now, I don't even buy this argument that Trump is interfering with a political rival, because he was, even if you accept all the quid pro quo thing, the quid pro quo he's asking for is about Hunter Biden and Hunter Biden's business activities in Ukraine. And Joe Biden had no business activities in Ukraine, and Joe Biden has gone around boasting that he had no idea what his son was up to in Ukraine, and according to which of his inconsistent stories you believe, he didn't even know that Hunter was on the board of any companies in Ukraine. So it's actually a stretch as it is to say that this is something to do with a political rival, and it becomes even more of a stretch if the guy doesn't even make it to Iowa and New Hampshire. Do you think he will make it to Iowa and New Hampshire, Alex?
It's hard to say. Lots of people coming out. A lot of people I know don't like the Democrats in general. But as a whole, I think that his job is just to see the conflict or quote unquote conflict. I think the Democrat voters in general would prefer a different candidate, but that's not the play of the Democrat upper class.
That's a good way of putting it, Alex. I'm going to try and figure this out, because you look at Joe Biden stumbling around. He doesn't know what state he's in half the time. And it may well be that he was just told, get out there. We don't want to beat Trump. We actually want to impeach Trump and remove him from office before he even gets to November 2020. And the way to do that is to put Joe Biden out there and then hang some impeachment thing on Trump over the Hunter Biden thing. That's a brilliant theory, Alex. Thank you for making that. So he's got to stay in there. Brilliant. He's got to stay in there until Iowa, or he doesn't. Here's the thing. This idea that Trump is interfering in asking a foreign government to get the goods on his political opponent. On what basis does that argument have any credibility? This is a republic, right? So the point of a republic is that you do not have hereditary power. So in theory, the fact that the son of a former vice president is an obviously corrupt man, an obviously corrupt, sleazy figure who is getting money for doing nothing. He's getting millions of dollars in a country where the average salary is $200 a month, and he's making up to $80,000 a month. That's Hunter Biden. And if either this is a republic or it's not, but if it is a republic, then what the corrupt son of a former vice president does is actually nothing to do with a so-called political rival. But as I said, it's a question of whether this is really a republic or it's not. I'd rather have an honest-to-God nobility with people running around calling themselves marquises and viscounts and things than have a system where you're a pseudo-republic, an ersatz republic, to go back to what Jim DeMint was talking about, and yet you have people who, it's one thing, people have a high tolerance for corruption. They accept the fact that Joe Biden made more money in the year after he left office than he'd made in the previous 20 years, that his wife is getting a money for a book deal, that an advance for a book deal, an advance to that book can never earn out, and that she doesn't. They accept a certain level of corruption in the republic, but Hunter Biden tests that to breaking point. This is a man of no obvious talents or skills. He's a completely undistinguished person who has been wafted up through life by one thing only: the surname Biden. He was made a consultant to MBNA. That's a bank headquartered in Delaware. They're one of those banks who every 3 weeks or so you get something in the mail offering you a credit card and saying you're already pre-approved or whatever. They're one of those, they're not like the First National Bank of Dead Moose Junction. You've no idea where they are, but they're actually in Delaware. And Joe Biden was so solicitous of their needs that he was known as the senator for MBNA for many years. And oddly enough, his talentless son gets hired as a consultant. Oddly enough, Joe Biden, who's famous for being the most dedicated patron of Amtrak, Joe Biden's son at the age of 26 gets made a director of Amtrak. No talent man, utterly undistinguished man. Wherever Joe Biden goes, a cozy sinecure for Hunter Biden follows. So that when Joe Biden becomes point man on Ukraine, Hunter Biden immediately gets appointed to the board of Burisma, so that Burisma, who are having a big investigation in the United Kingdom for corruption and have had their bank accounts frozen in the United Kingdom. They're terrified of the United States doing the same thing. And the way to prevent the United States doing the same thing is to put the vice president's son on the board. It stinks. Either you're a republic or you're not, but you don't have, there's not supposed to be a nobility in America. Simply because you're the second Duke of Biden does not entitle you to inherit all the sinecures and benefits that the original Biden did. Vice president and senator are not titles of nobility, but that are titles that are in the gift of the people, and they do not extend to the sons and nephews and brothers and all the other sleazy trash around Joe Biden. Is Joe Biden corrupt? Absolutely. We talk about Adam Schiff's most famous moment was when Trump released the transcript of the call to the Ukrainian president, and there was nothing in it that you could read out that would sound damaging. So Adam Schiff had to do his so-called parody. And invent words and put them in the president's mouth. But you don't have to invent words to put in Joe Biden's mouth. The so-called mafioso routine that Adam Schiff had to insert into the president's mouth actually comes out of Joe Biden's mouth. Joe Biden actually says, you got 6 hours, pal, to fire this guy or you don't get $1 billion. Quid pro Joe. Quid pro Joe. You got 6 hours or you get 6 hours, fire this guy I don't like, or you don't get $1 billion. That's Joe Biden. Sleazy, corrupt. You're either a republic or you're not. But you don't have titles of nobility. So it's one thing to have a stinking, corrupt, sleazy first Duke of Biden, but those privileges do not then attach to the idiot son, the second Duke of Biden, because there's no titles of nobility here. More straight ahead.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
Hey, let's go to Shawneen in Vancouver, Washington. I was musing on Adam's skiff limericks at the top of the show, and I believe Shawneen has one. How's your limerick going today, Shawneen?
Oh, it's great. It was taking me a little while to think it through, but here's what I came up with.
Okay, go for it.
All right. There once was a guy on a skiff. We like to call him Old Shifty Schiff, trying to take down Trump while he sits like a lump. His meetings and methods are stiff.
Okay, good for you, and it all rhymes. I'm impressed by that. I was thinking we were going to have some of those dubious rhymes for Adam Schiff, but that all rhymes perfectly. Congratulations to you, Shawneen. Adam Schiff in the skiff. That has been some fine versifying, courtesy of Shawneen in Vancouver, Washington. Mark Stein, Open Line Friday. Talk about anything you want, and as I always say, if you're a liberal, if you're a hardcore socialist, like so many people are these days, do give me a call, 1-800-282-2882.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
Elizabeth Warren has just thanked the group called Black, I don't even know how to say this, Womexon. It's like women, but with an X for instead of the E. So it's Black Womexon or whatever. But Black Womexon apparently represents certain types of women, and they've just endorsed Elizabeth Warren. And she says, thank you, Black Womexon. Black, trans and cis women, gender non-conforming and non-binary people are the backbone of our democracy. I'm committed to fighting alongside you. Do you know, I get the I'm beginning to just get the vague feeling that it's binary people, non-binary people are the backbone of our democracy, and the few remaining binary people left in the country, I'm not sure they have any backbone at all. But this is actually what the longer the Democrat primary goes on, the more Michael Bloomberg thinks he can snaffle the non-insane lane of the Democrat primary away from Joe Biden, because these candidates are galloping further and further along. Gender non-conforming, they're shoring up the gender non-conforming, non-binary segment of the party and leaving everywhere else wide open.
And now, filling in for Rush Limbaugh, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Stein.
Yes, Rush is away. America's anchorman is out today. He will return on Monday for Veterans Day. But in the meantime, this is your EIB anchor baby. No supporting paperwork whatsoever. Thrilled to be here. If you're one of those liberals fleeing the country, Joe Biden rather cryptically advised all other Democrat candidates to go to Canada. I don't know why. I don't know what we Canadians deserve to have done to deserve being buried under an avalanche of Democrat no-hopers. But for some reason, Joe Biden advised all the other Democrat candidates to go to Canada. And if you're one of those Democrat candidates fleeing America for Canada, if you're Amy Klobuchar or Julian Castro or Kamala Harris or Cory Booker, and you're fleeing the country, do swing by and say hello. You can't miss us. There's a big sign we got out on the highway saying last Rush guest host before the border, and we would love to see you. I do love fights among the Rainbow Coalition. The Democrat strategy, and you see this from their general disposition, the way I think it's Western Connecticut State. Is that a proper university? It is. That wasn't an entirely serious question, Greg. Greg just said in my ear, yes, it is. But my general view of there's universities ever, like Burlington, Vermont. It's a town of 100,000 people, and it's got like 12 higher education institutions until Mrs. Bernie Sanders, God bless her, ran one of them into the ground and reduced the number of fine educational establishments by one. And I wish the Mrs. Bernie Sanders model could be applied across the country. But anyway, Western Connecticut State University is tracking down people who put up "it's okay to be white" flyers on the grounds that it's not okay to be white and it's totally hateful. And so they're going to try and find whichever students did this and kick them out of the university. And that's basically been the Democrat strategy. To build a coalition of the others, that you take blacks and women and gays and trans and Muslim and lesbians and Hispanic, and you put together a coalition of the other, and it all works. And so I always like it when the Rainbow Coalition descends into civil war. There's a fabulous piece in the New York Times, I think this was yesterday, "Stop Blaming Black Homophobia for Buttigieg's Problems. Let's put an end to this racist trope." This is by Charles M. Blow. Mr. Blow is a big op-ed guy at the New York Times. Now, Buttigieg has been doing very well in the polls. If you take away the three so-called front runners, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, then you've got coming in at fourth place with an impressive 6% is Pete Buttigieg, this guy who's been mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and is a gay candidate. And we all love the gays. Everybody loves the gays. The Rainbow Coalition, gay, gay, gay. We support gay, LGBT. I always lose it after the second T, but whatever it is, we all love them. And so they're wondering, why is Pete Buttigieg stalled at 6%? And it's because he's got no support among black people and the black voters. Now, this is critical to the Democrats' election strategy. They lost last time in part because black voters were unenthused by Hillary Clinton and so didn't turn out for her. And now they're going slightly further. They're trying to figure out why black voters are unenthused by Pete Buttigieg, and they put it down to black homophobia, which is, just to put it in a non-American context, it's a thing elsewhere. It's certainly true in the British West Indies and in Bermuda, where there is a certain antipathy, to put it at its mildest, towards homosexuality. And there was a period at one time when if you were that way inclined, you could find yourself on death row in some parts of the British West Indies, and those poor chaps would be appealing it all up to the Privy Council in London, which is the highest court of appeal for Jamaica and those people. So and this led to an outbreak of homophobic rapping. Do you like the homophobic rapping? It's a thing. It's not like homophobic chicken that you get from Chick-fil-A. Everybody's opposed to the homophobic chicken. If you try to open up a homophobic chicken outlet in a liberal town, they'll all protest you. But the homophobic rapping is more problematic. And there have been fantastic pieces arguing that we wouldn't have all these homophobic rappers from the Caribbean if it weren't that they'd learned their homophobia from their old colonial masters. It was the white colonial plantation owner who taught the black man to be homophobic. And we now have a classic example of that genre in the New York Times. Charles M. Blow says, "For the record, I am bisexual and not a religious man." But he nevertheless objects to people who see black religiosity as an indicator of primitive thinking and lack of enlightenment on homosexuality. Reducing Pete Buttigieg's struggle to attract black support solely to black homophobia is not only erroneous, it is a disgusting racist trope secretly nursed and insidiously whispered by white liberals with contempt for the very black people they court and need. It is in the tribal nature of gay culture that white men still center their white maleness as privileged, if one step removed from that enjoyed by their heterosexual brothers, where racial minorities are too often fetishized and thingified, seen more as an opportunity than an equal. I can't believe this is the new. You wonder why nobody is reading American newspapers, why they're dying. They're unreadable. This paragraph by this guy on the opinion page of the most prestigious newspaper in the United States, the newspaper The Record, it's unreadable. Quote, "It is in the tribal nature of gay culture that white men still center their white maleness as privileged, if one step removed from that enjoyed by their heterosexual brothers." Now, I think what that means is that gay white men aren't quite as white privileged as non-gay white men, but they're still pretty white privileged compared to black gay men who they look on as a fetish and they thingify them. And this is why no black people are, this is what he says. He's saying that it's not because blacks are homophobic that they don't like Pete Buttigieg. Well, we shall see. That's certainly a thing. And Pete Buttigieg, the quotations they have about this is that people would rather he didn't focus on his gayness. Their preference is for his sexuality to not be front and center. And he likes it to be front and center. He kisses his husband on stage. He's giving the guy the full tipper. If you had the misfortune to be at the 2000 Democrat convention when Al gave Tipper the world's longest tongue sandwich, as we used to say at my school days. Anyway, I love this. I love rifts in the Rainbow Coalition, because the Democrat strategy is to pretend that if you're not white, then straight white men are the people you all gang up on. If you're anything other than a straight white man, then straight white men are the common enemy. And in fact, it's all more complicated than that. They ought to have it on pay-per-view. I would love to see like Rainbow Hunger Games or Game of Rainbow Thrones, in which warring kingdoms warring feudal fiefdoms of gays and trans and Muslims and Hispanics, all eventually, when they've killed off all the straight white men, they discover a whole bunch of differences between them. But they're beginning to emerge in the Democrat primary. The big question for the Democrats is, are they going to run a centrist candidate of any kind this time round? And I don't think that's what the base wants. They did that. They put up with Hillary last time round. They put up with her. That's all it was. They don't want someone like that. And in effect, what someone like Bloomberg does is Bloomberg helps take out Biden. And by helping Bloomberg is a guy who totally without any kind of appeal, except to certain coastal elites. Insofar as he's known at all between the East Coast and the West Coast, it's as a fanatical gun grabber. He presents himself as a centrist, but in fact he's not a centrist at all. He's as radical as Beto when it comes to the Second Amendment. It's just that he presents more centrist. But at the same time, he's regarded as one of those billionaires that Elizabeth Warren wants to fleece. The fact is, it would take a brilliant candidate, a candidate of genuine charisma, as opposed to the black hole of charisma, which is what Michael Bloomberg is. It would take a brilliant candidate actually to be able to drag the Democrats away from their leftist inclinations. And at some point, what will happen is that the moderate lane, currently represented by Joe Biden, stumbling along, no enthusiasm for him, now with this billionaire getting in to drain all his money, and all that does is increase the likelihood that the candidate who emerges victorious from for example, Joe Biden's already written off Iowa and New Hampshire, and he claims to be still ahead in South Carolina because of the black vote. Where have you heard this before? Rudy Giuliani in 2008, same thing. As his numbers headed south in Iowa and New Hampshire, he said, oh, don't worry, he's still got his Florida firewall. Once you start losing actual states, like Joe Biden is on course to do in Iowa and New Hampshire, then your firewall in South Carolina and Florida goes south pretty quickly. The Dems want a left-wing candidate, and they don't care whether it depresses turnout among. They want an identity politics candidate who's also a left-wing candidate, and they're not going to be denied it by various septuagenarian, middle-brow, moderate geezers, all spending a lot of money for a mushy moderate lane nobody wants to be in. Mark Stein in for Rush. We'll take your calls straight ahead.
Are you thinking about joining Rush 24/7?
If you become a member, that's when you can watch the program on the Ditto Cam. That's when you can stream the program live and access the podcast of each program.
Get Rush 24/7 and the Rush app now in the iTunes Store or at Google Play.
You really should think about getting it.
You're listening to the EIB.
Mark Stein in for Rush. It's Eric Chiaramella Day. On Open Line Friday, the name of the whistleblower has been known for some time, but for some reason everybody agreed in the media not to mention the name of the whistleblower. You can out all kinds of people. If somebody makes a $100 donation to a support traditional marriage campaign in California, you can find out the name of the person who made the $100 donation, destroy his life, get him fired from Mozilla, was it? You can do that, but you can't mention the name of Eric Chiaramella. Whatever you do, if you're in the media, if you work for the New York Times, if you work for NBC, or if you work for CNN, work for the Washington Post, don't mention the name of Eric Chiaramella. And then Adam Schiff, he had an accident. His skiff started leaking. That happens a lot, actually, to skiffs when they're going across the Rio Grande with too many people on them. But Eric Chiaramella, his skiff developed the same problem, started leaking, and he accidentally posted the name of Eric Chiaramella in a transcript he published on the House of Representatives website, including the question, okay, does a person by the name of Eric Chiaramella ring a bell for you? So everyone now knows Eric Chiaramella is the name of the whistleblower. And I said, just as a throwaway line a couple of hours ago, I think I said, Eric Chiaramella is the thing to say on a bright Hawaiian Christmas day. And Bill from Buffalo, the muse descended. A beautiful right, buffalo, Mike. Just across the Niagara River from my beloved home province of Ontario. Bill, great to have you with us from Buffalo, and you too are a fan of that beloved Yuletide standard.
That's exactly right, Mark, and it's an honor to speak with you, and I found the lyrics that you were missing for the song.
Okay.
So here is the Eric Chiaramella song. Eric Chiaramella is the name we say on this drear and cloudy D.C. day. He's the whistleblower with the Ukraine truth, or so the Democrats will say. Still, we think it's fishy and we find it odd. His lawyer used a hashtag for a coup d'etat. Eric Chiaramella is a liar's way to brave for impeachment. A very scary impeachment. A very, very scary, scary witch hunt. It's true.
Oh, bravo. Love that, Bill. That's great. Bing and the Andrews sisters, eat your heart out. That's the definitive version of that
Thank you,
song.
Sir.
Great.
I can only say 4 words in your accent.
And what 4 words are they?
Thanks a lot, Taka. It's the best.
Okay. Yeah, I paid a fortune to. That's my catchphrase. I paid some guy $2 million to come up with that catchphrase. It's the best. It's the best he could do. Thank you very much for that. That's Bill in Buffalo. Eric Chiaramella, and he's also I mentioned 2 hours ago that he's also in the Mueller report. He's mentioned by name in the Mueller report. This is a political operative. In the brilliant best-selling version of the Mele Kalikimaka, Eric Chiaramella, Mele Chiaramella Christmas song, there was indeed, as you just heard, a reference to a coup, and that is what has been going on. Ever since November 2016, what happened wasn't supposed to happen. Trump was supposed to be the idiot candidate, an idiot vanity candidate who was supposed to be totally clobbered by Hillary, who would ascend to the throne as the first female president of the United States. That was what was supposed to happen. There was a joke election for the Senate in Vermont. I believe, would this be 1998, I think, if memory serves, in which effectively the Democrats sabotaged the Republican primary and put some charming but idiotic dairy farmer from Tunbridge, Vermont, to run against Pat Leahy. The idiot dairy farmer, who was like a colorful character but wasn't a Republican, lost catastrophically to Pat Leahy, which he didn't mind because in the end he voted for Pat Leahy. And he was a joke. And Pat Leahy loved it because the preferred candidates for Democrats are Republican jokes. And Trump was supposed to be a joke vanity candidate who would lose to Hillary. And when he won, the humiliation of that, not just Hillary losing, but Hillary losing to this guy, and the bureaucracy and the Democrats and the media got together to subvert and reverse that election result. And this guy, Chiaramella, has been in on that plot since day one.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, for Rush Limbaugh, we return to Mark Steyn.
Rush is away, but we have a cure for that. You do not need to be discombobulated by a sinister foreign guest host. If you subscribe to the Limbaugh Letter, you'll always have something to read to take your mind off the lousy third-rate guest host who's on the radio. Just go to rushlimbaugh.com, subscribe to the Limbaugh Letter. In the current issue, Rush talks to Kimberly Strassel of the Wall Street Journal. Kimberly is brilliant. She has terrific insights into what's going on, and she talks with Rush about the anti-Trump resistance. And she says, quite correctly, that it's not the president who's damaging American norms and American institutions, but in fact this so-called resistance that is inflicting the damage on them. And also, Ukraine, everyone's an expert on Ukraine now, but Rush actually is. And he'll be talking about, in the current issue of the Limbaugh Letter, he's got a great expose there on deep state panic over CrowdStrike's connections to Ukraine. Yeah, I'm sick of saying Ukraine. I think I'm going to say the Ukraine. Along with the outed whistleblower, I'm going to out the definite article. I never liked it being dropped from the Ukraine. I don't like saying Ukraine, so I'm going to go back to saying the Ukraine. Anyway, that's all in the Limbaugh Letter. Go to rushlimbaugh.com. And you'll see a Limbaugh Letter button up there, and you can click on that, and you will be in seventh heaven. Among the bad news this week, Virginia. Don't carry me back to old Virginia, because it's turned blue, and nobody can figure out how that happened, except for Gabriella Hoffman from The Resurgent, who has a piece in there called Here's What Happened in Virginia. And it's great to have Gabriella with us, and are you there, Gabriella?
Thank you for having me.
That sounds great.
I'm here.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
good.
I'm here. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can, Gabriella. Tell me something. When the results came through on Tuesday night, and you looked at this blue tide in Virginia, were you surprised, or did it pretty much align with your expectations?
I would say it was the latter. Just given that I've been studying a lot of the electoral trends in Virginia since I moved there from California about 7 years ago. And for 2-3 years, the Democrats in Virginia have said they are out for blood and they want to retake many of the legislative seats Republicans had gained in 2015 and in years prior. And they were keen on doing it just because of different factors, especially the fact that there is no real party apparatus. I know a lot of callers had called into the program and talked about that, and their fears are confirmed. I haven't seen much from the state party, having been an activist and a consultant, and I've talked with many people and activists across the state of Virginia, from Northern Virginia to the Tidewater region to the coal country to everything in between, and many people were really disappointed that the party didn't put up more candidates on one end and really couldn't match the spending that came in from the likes of Michael Bloomberg, Planned Parenthood, Emily's List, Everytown for gun safety, and all the other interest groups that poured in millions of dollars to overwhelm ads and airwaves and just really make Republicans feel depressed and not interested in voting.
Well, a couple of weeks ago up in Canada, the Conservative Party there was handed a perfect scenario where the Prime Minister, the Liberal Prime Minister, had been uncovered in very unliberal guise in, I think, at least 3 videos, appearing in blackface and indeed black arms, black hands, capering about. Virginia, in that sense, is the Canada of the American electoral map, because the Democrats had a blackface governor and a blackface attorney general, which, as in Canada, should have been a gift to the opposition. And yet it didn't work out that way. What's up with that?
No, it was really an opportunity to use those scandals. Plus, our lieutenant governor was implicated on accusations that he engaged in sexual assault. And it seems like they didn't run through with it. And some may argue, well, because it was paced 9 months in advance before the election, there could have been no opportunity, or maybe people were getting bored of that topic. But had they employed more aggressive tactics, certainly that albatross for all 3 top lawmakers certainly could have hung over their heads. But again, I just think the party has capitulated. And I argued in my piece that a lot of this shifting and this return to blue. It's not a complete shift to blue because Virginia historically really hasn't been a red state. Only in 1993 in those elections did you see, I think, arguably the first Republican governor, and then Bob McDonnell in 2009. That was the last Republican governor. And in between that, you didn't even have a completely red governorship plus state legislature in many of those scenarios. And even when Democrats were out of power, Republicans had control of both legislatures, which was just the case in the state. But had they hired perhaps better consultants, played those ads more, in Northern Virginia, I didn't hear a peep from much of Republicans, maybe up until a week out. And understandably, yes, it's a liberal area, but you still could have used those scandals to your advantage. And even in the nearby suburbs where the politics are still in play and Republicans aren't completely out of the woods there and out of friendly territory there. So, yeah, it's a shame. And I, on numerous occasions, and at the resurgence, I said, why aren't they taking advantage of this? And others were echoing my sentiments, too. It really would have ultimately played in their favor, and they chose not to play it so much.
Well, you say in the piece that when you first moved to Virginia, people said, well, you don't understand Virginia, you don't know Virginia, because you're actually from California originally. And you decided to get out of California. And I wondered, California was Nixon's California, Reagan's California, and suddenly now it's deep blue, permanent blue California, except for red rural redoubts. Orange County went in the last electoral cycle. Is Virginia now, as California is, a blue state?
I wouldn't go so far to say that it's a lost cause. I would say the immediate suburbs of Washington, D.C., perhaps maybe lost causes for now, unless Republicans put up a fight. The guy who ran in my district didn't campaign much, and he garnered 30% of the vote in the Mount Vernon portion of Alexandria, which is in Fairfax County. And had maybe he done more, maybe he could have gotten 40 or 45%. It just is a matter of whether or not are they going to put the effort, are they going to campaign, knock doors, because you see how many vote tallies Democrats get across the years, every 2 years if it's a House of Delegates, or every 4 years if it's a state senator. And if Republicans are able to churn out as many votes as the Democrat got or more, they could potentially take those seats or flip those seats. And it's interesting.
Well, let me ask you this, because you did point out that Virginia until a quarter century ago, or maybe, the election of John Warner in the late 70s, but historically it was essentially the old racist Democrat party, the blackface Democrat party of the governor and the attorney general, had a hammerlock on it until 25 years ago, and then there was a Republican interlude, and we now have the new woke Democrats, and occasionally they intersect so that you have, in the shape of Governor Northam, woke blackface Democrats. There's a little bit of overlap, but essentially it looks like there might just be a Republican interlude of 20 years or whatever. There's a subject that's not mentioned in your piece, Gabriella, and people have figured that this has something to do with it, which is the increased immigration into Virginia. That if you go back 40 years ago, about 1 in 100 Virginians was foreign born. It's something closer to 1 in 9 now. And they say when you get up to about 15% foreign born, that almost inevitably makes a district or a state house seat trend Democrat. Is immigration a factor in this?
You certainly do have immigration being a factor, and those individuals tend to vote Democrat, especially in parts of Loudoun County. We saw that in Fairfax County. But just the fact that it's a hub of government contractors who increasingly vote blue to match that as well. People coming from the Northeast and other states that see Virginia as kind of a relief area, and then they bring those policies with them. And definitely it can be explained that an influx of immigration and those who tend to vote Democrat have flocked to the region too. But it's just kind of the epicenter of all things government, and government has grown very big in the last few decades. So it's a natural center for them to gravitate to, and they bring their politics there as well. since they get tired of Maryland and Washington, D.C. So now Virginia is experiencing a lot of what the remainder of the greater D.C. metro area is experiencing. So, yeah, it wasn't because I was trying to omit it, but those are certainly factors as well.
Let me ask you a final question, Gabriella, because I think it's tough when people, as you said, you were from California and then you decided to get out of California and go to Virginia. And you mentioned that you know Virginians who think, the jig's up and they're thinking of moving on. I live in New Hampshire, and there are certainly people who remember when New Hampshire was the sole red state that provided the margin of victory for George W. Bush in 2000, and it turned purple, and then the purple started to look awfully blue, and you think maybe it's time to move on. Is that actually happening in Virginia, that people are thinking this is a permanent shift and they're looking for somewhere else to go?
There are some people who have expressed that sentiment. I have seen that on social media and different comment sections of some of our state daily papers. I haven't heard anyone in my immediate circles planning to leave, but I warn everyone. I said, this is not just going to be contained to Virginia. There's a movement, and I hope you do get familiar, and Mr. Limbaugh, too, as well, of efforts like Flippable, the DLCC, and other efforts to flip deep red state seats in the legislatures from red to blue. And I think I saw some metrics that showed that they have already flipped since Trump was elected, 400 seats, give or take. And they're very keen on taking back the 1,000 seats lost that were witnessed under President Obama's administration. And they're very serious being in play in states like North Carolina. That's where the next target of theirs is going to be. On websites like Flippable, they have a map where they have their next targets. They want to flip Texas blue. They want to flip Pennsylvania blue. Is definitely something they're going to seek out next. They said within the next 2 to 4 years, Pennsylvania is a place that they hope to flip successfully. And they're going to do it everywhere. So there may not be a place for people to escape to, and perhaps maybe people have to become more keen on changing and staying in the fight.
Yeah, standing and staying in the fight. Thanks a lot for that, Gabriella. It's a very interesting piece. Here's What Happened in Virginia by Gabriella Hoffman. You can read it in The Resurgent. And I want to pick up on just something she said about those flippable states when we come back. Mark Stein in for Rush. Lots more straight ahead.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
I mentioned that we've adopted a lot of aspects of life previously associated with life behind the Iron Curtain. Eric Chiaramella, that name is the name of the whistleblower. It's in the Mueller report. It's in a publicly available document, but Facebook has removed every mention of Chiaramella's name from Facebook. You're not allowed to know it, even though it's in the Mueller report, even though it was posted on the House of Representatives website. Facebook has decided, much as Pravda did in the bad old days east of the Iron Curtain, that you are not allowed to know that name. Let's go to Chris in Tampa, Florida, on this 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And you were actually stationed in Germany at that time, Chris.
Sure, I certainly was. I was in Berlin. The night the wall fell, I was there a year before and a year after the wall. I saw true communism while I was at Field Station in Berlin. And I'll tell you what, if anybody ever even thinks about socialism or communism, you'd better go see someplace like Venezuela that has that right now, because it's a terrible, terrible thing. The people there, they didn't have anything. They all drove the same car, a Turbulent, which maybe went 55 miles an hour.
And the exhaust of those things seemed to come out in the back seat, so that if you ever traveled in the back seat, you were choking after the first mile and a half.
After the wall fell, they were everywhere, and I would like to give a quick shout out to my mentor and best friend Dale Irwin, who's hunting with my Uncle Ralph. They got me started on this show, and you guys are absolutely awesome.
Hey,
one thing I would.
Yeah, carry on.
Sorry?
Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to talk about too is once when the wall fell, after it fell, everybody was partying. The city actually shut down for about 2 weeks or so. And if you had an East German passport, you could take it into any West German bank, and they would give you 75 marks, I believe, at the time, just to give the East Germans something to spend on all the goods, all the new goods and services that they've seen, because back before the wall fell, there was absolutely nothing. I mean, I can remember going to the east side while it was still communism, and we were in an SUV that was polluting everything over there. Yeah. But a group of school kids came by, and the person who owned the car had a window that went down, the back window went down automatically, and the entire group of school kids, must have been about 13 or 14 kids, stopped, and they stared at this magical window going down on the back of an SUV.
No, great. I mean, people have no idea, Chris. Thank you for your call, Chris. That is, people have no idea. And what was interesting about East and West Berlin is it's the same city. It's the same city. And there's no reason why the people on the eastern side couldn't be living as well as the people on the western side. They're related. They're cousins of each other. They all had family on both sides of the wall. They're the same ethnically, genetically. They're exactly the same. The only difference is that one half of that city was in a prison and the other half of that city were free to live their lives to their potential. That's the difference, and we have forgotten that across these last 30 years. Mark Stein for Rush. We'll close it out in just a moment.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
The whistleblower's lawyer has written to the president's lawyer, warning him that the president is placing the whistleblower's life in danger. The whistleblower is not a whistleblower. The whistleblower is a man called Chiaramella, who is mentioned in the Mueller report and has been part of this story since its beginning, since 3 years ago, when the permanent bureaucracy, the Democrats and the media determined to destroy this president. Happy 244th birthday to the Marine Corps. Rush back Monday.